Listen, I see a lot of so-called leadership development. I don't think it's preparing leaders in any way to be the kind of leaders that are needed now. It's woefully inadequate. One of the things I do at the IMD is I do 3 days within a 4-week program. They respect me enough now that when they present my work, and it's typically 40 global leaders, they say this is the highlight of the whole program. We need to rewrite the whole idea of leadership development.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of The Conscious Capitalists with myself, Timothy Henry, and my partner in making the world a better place through business, Raj Sisodia. Hello there, Raj.
Hey, Timothy. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, and I know you had surgery last week, and I'm hoping you're recovering well from all of that.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Well, that's interesting because today we're going to talk about healing leadership. And who better to introduce healing leadership than you, the author of or co-author of the Healing Organization. Raj, please introduce our guest today.
Welcome, Nicholas. Nicholas is an executive coach and a leadership expert who I had the pleasure of spending a few days with him and Bob Anderson, another icon in the world of leadership development, in a program, I think, on advanced leadership concepts or integral leadership and all kinds of things that we will get into today. Nicholas has a very interesting background. He was actually a theater director, teaching at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London and researching peak performance. And from that, we will learn how he transitioned into the world of leadership and working with CEOs and senior teams, as well as teaching at some of the leading business schools in Europe. His most recent book is called Leader as Healer, a new paradigm for 21st century leadership. And that was published in 2022 and won the Business Book of the Year award in 2023, which is a significant honor and certainly well-deserved. So, Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to our exchange.
Thank you, Raj and Timothy. It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
Let me maybe begin by having you maybe introduce a fundamental shift that you think needs to be made in leadership. And I think you describe it as the move from leader as executor, get that stuff done, to leader as healer. So maybe talk to us a little bit about what that means and put it in the context of maybe today's business environment.
Well, let me start with a question I love to pose to all the leaders I work with, which comes from the great Einstein, who I'm sure we all admire. And he asked a very simple question: is your mind your master or your servant? Now, I've come to see more and more that the answer to that changes everything. And because of our education, because of the collective paradigm we are in, 95% of the leaders I work with, the mind is the master. I think that's catastrophic because it means, on the one hand, we're living in what I call a very narrow bandwidth. Our perceptual field is very, very limited. And we're also not accessing huge parts of our intelligence. So I sometimes call my work activating whole self-intelligence. So it's a little bit like we took the USB out of the whole parts of ourselves, which went offline. And I think it's totally urgent that we start to put the USB back in, because the linear thinking mind is very far short of adequate to address the kind of complexity and really fast-growing chaos we're in. I mean, the word collapse, I don't think is too strong a word for what we're in now. And I think we need to call on the deepest, widest intelligence we can. And for that, we have to break that pattern of the mind dominating, thinking. How are you feeling? I'll tell you what I'm thinking, not what I'm feeling, for instance.
How often do you hear that? How are you feeling? And they then tell a story about something that happened today, and you're like, "Well, didn't think that was one of the feeling words, was it?"
Exactly.
So, I think it's a fascinating time to be having this dialogue because we're having a lot of discussions about AI and, AI as a quote unquote thinking machine, and really reinforcing the idea of linear thinking, of linear processing. What it misses is what I think you're referring to as wisdom.
Yeah.
And is wisdom getting evolved out with this incredible intelligence or thinking capability that we're starting to be able to develop with machine learning?
I think it got pushed out a long time ago. And AI is simply exacerbating that. I don't see a problem with AI if we use it properly. I use AI, it's a remarkable tool. But this whole, even the whole notion that it could become conscious is absurd. It's totally absurd. I don't know who said it, but I love the quote that I read on LinkedIn, I think, that someone said, AI will take over all our cognitive functioning within a year, probably. But in 100 years' time, it will be nowhere near our heart-mind intelligence. The problem is that we've completely lost the meaning of intelligence. And we think it's all about linear processing and thinking. We're in huge crisis. I think we're in collapse time. And I think what you're pointing to is one of the foundational reasons for that. We've absolutely lost track of what is wisdom.
So, Nicholas, can you expand on that? So, what do you mean heart-mind intelligence?
Well, actually, I would say body, heart, mind. I would include intuition. I would also include our transcendent capacity. A lot of my work is very rooted in reawakening the body, because I think it's not just that we've gone so much into thinking. I think we've become chronically disconnected from the body. I understand how that happens, and maybe we should talk about that. And the body is a huge field of intelligence. I mean, huge. And I've been working deeply with the body for 50 years. And I'm still in awe of how that intelligence keeps growing in me. And it shows me more and more that in our culture, we've forgotten it. When I work with a group of leaders, I often ask them, can you know how it feels like when your body is really alive? Maybe you went to a class or this, or you were walking, whatever. You feel good in your body. Your senses are open. Reality is vivid. And everyone says, yeah, I know that feeling. And then I say, okay, but what percentage of each day do you live in that? And heads go down because it's somewhere between 5 and 10%. So I'm like, but do you get what we've normalized? Do you understand that we've normalized that? It's not bad or wrong. I'm not criticizing, but let's understand what a small version of reality we've normalized, meaning we accept it until we don't, until we wake up. It's a bit right, to make it very simple. I walk around like that, and then I have a really good massage, and that happens. But only in that moment do I realize, oh my goodness, I was walking around like that. I'll give you another example. A CEO client a while back, she was working with me. She'd been working a couple of months. And she came to a session one day and she said, Nicholas, I'm just beginning to realize no one is really listening to anyone. Really. She said, I see people speak and I see it doesn't really land. That's waking up. That's waking up, because before that, she didn't notice.
So let's make that tangible, Nicholas. So in this conversation right now, I feel like I'm connecting from my head and my thoughts and everything else. My body's here, feeling a little warm because the AC is off. But beyond that, how would we bring our body into this exchange, this experience? What should we be doing?
Very, very, very simply, we switch on, if that's what we need to do, we switch on the faculty of paying attention, of noticing. And we drop that attention down into our body. We can do it for a moment. We're not trying to stop thinking, but that's going more in the background. Foreground is I'm noticing my breathing. As simple as that. Just close our eyes if you wish. I'm just noticing my breathing. I'm noticing the movements. I'm noticing the sensations with curiosity, like, wow, no, I've never really noticed this. Because anyway, each breath is different. And then if there's one more intentional thing I do, I just relax the out-breath deliberately. I let the out-breath be longer. And as I do that, I have a sense of dropping down, connecting more with my chair. Literally, I feel my chair more. Maybe I notice more my contact with the floor. So each breath, I'm just very gently relaxing the out-breath, softening the out-breath. Thinking is happening, it's happening, it's happening. But my attention is, for now, in my physical reality. Maybe my body wants to take a deeper breath. Just allow my body to do whatever is natural right now. How's that, Raj? How is that feeling? And Timothy?
Good.
And I think we need to be doing that throughout our day as a primary inner action, let's say. Otherwise, we get caught in doing what I call a forward circle of doing, and we're actually up and out, and we need to come back and down in order to relate more to the world, because otherwise I don't have space. This is what I'm teaching leaders all the time. I don't have space for you if I'm up and out. I only actually have space for you when I'm back and down in my body. Then I can listen to you, I can feel you.
Well,
This is fundamental rearranging. Does it make sense?
oh, it makes total sense. And what I love about it is that it comes back to the relational.
Exactly.
Because to me, what comes up as you speak and what I experience is, when you're in this space, you're much more open to relationship. And when you think about the core of leadership is relationship. And now we get into this dialogue about power versus influence, right? In the sense that as a leader, if I have a relationship with you, then I'm not using power, I'm using influence. I'm trying to connect with you, I'm trying to motivate you, I'm trying to help you bring your best to whatever task you're at right now. And that's very different from I'm going to direct you and tell you what needs to be done. You're going to do it, which is much more transactional and more in my head and more, but I'm not taking into account how you're receiving it. Maybe you're not listening to me.
It's literally not relational. So I love what you're saying, Timothy. I want to add one thing. Raj, because I was touched when I heard you'd had surgery as well. Because sometimes when we do what we just did, sometimes we also need to include what's happening emotionally. Like maybe I'm a little bit anxious or irritated or sad. And that will obstruct our connection. So it's a very deep part of my work is what I call radical inclusion, that everything needs to be included. For me to be really present, everything needs to be included without hierarchy. So there's no positive or negative. There is what is really happening inside me. And it's only to the degree that I fully include that I will land in the space you're talking about, Timothy, where I genuinely have space for you. This is a core part of my work, and with teams as well. When teams are meeting, what's really happening here? Because if we don't include that, our important strategic conversation will be disconnected from the beginning. And our highest critical thinking will be impaired. It will be impaired. Our highest critical thinking happens when everything is included. So if there's anxiety in the room, let's acknowledge that for a moment and let's feel it. It's very normal. Let's breathe into it. And then there's a settling. Then we have a higher level of conversation, much higher. This is the ABC, and it's unbelievable that it's not really taught. Actually, I teach at business schools. This is not really taught.
Well, I think in most companies, cultures, we are supposed to be professional, right? What does it mean to be professional?
It's absurd.
Leave all your baggage, your emotional, all of that stuff out, right? You're just here.
I know. I meet that all the time.
A robotic way to do your job, right?
Yeah.
Without anything. We had a colleague in our movement, Jeff Klein, who used to say we're proudly unprofessional at times. Tried to say that we don't have to put on a persona or a mask. We can be showing up fully, authentically.
I actually recently asked AI, show me the data for how heart-centered, empathic leadership improves business performance. Incredible percentage statistics. So number one. Okay. Second, teams I work with often adopt a practice of beginning a meeting with 2 minutes silence. Oh, it's not, oh no, we don't have time to do that. Well, if you do that, you will have, as every team who does that knows, a far higher level of conversation. So what is this professional nonsense? Actually, it has only one source, which is fear. If you slow down, naturally, you notice how anxious you are. So you will do everything not to feel that. And you will tell me we don't have time for 2 minutes silence. No, what you really Google Translate, I'm scared. And that needs to be honored and respected and very gently addressed. But don't tell me it's unprofessional, because it's nonsense. It means you're not interested in high performance. I spent 40 years studying high performance. And I need this all the time. And we wrestle. At the IND, we have a 3-day program. The first day is a lot of wrestling. And second day, people start crying. Men who haven't cried for 5 or 10 years start crying. And the first change happens when we do deep somatic work, which means getting everyone lying down on the floor, really deep breathing, really connecting with the body. It looks very, very simple. Really exploring what it means to be grounded. And after about 45 minutes of that, most people are in a quite altered state, which they love. They love, and they're like, wow, I didn't know you could feel like this. So then we're already in a different conversation. But the big threshold is always the emotional one. It's always the emotional one. We don't do vulnerability. We're professional. We don't do vulnerability. Until you do, until you realize then that that's the gateway to a much higher level of performance individually and team.
Well, I love that you begin at one level, you can have this dialogue around performance. And I love that you begin with it's about high performance. It's not do-goodiness. It's about high performance. And it's about when are we at our best?
Exactly.
And I'd like to tie that to making good decisions. Because as a team, you want your team to be at its best and make good decisions. And now you're going to have a dialogue around what are the circumstances where we are at our best as a team and we can make good decisions.
Exactly.
And that's where I think that the power of the practice becomes extraordinary. But how do you enter into that dialogue? I mean, it's a little bit like there's, to me, a mindset that I often find we run into, which is what Raj talked about earlier, the professional mindset. We don't do vulnerability here. It's a rare professional to say, we're proudly unprofessional at times, because all of that is within a paradigm of maybe traditional leadership. And now we come along and say, forget about the language. Let's talk about high performance. Let's talk about making really good decisions and managing in a time of radical uncertainty. So, I like to put high performance, good decisions, radical uncertainty together and say, how does that begin to shift the requirement of leadership and the requirement for high performing teams? So take that string for me, Nicholas, and pull it along a little bit.
I often start by saying you probably don't realize it, but you're only functioning at 20% of your real capacity. And I actually, a while back at the IMD, I had a Russian guy in the front row, and I said that, and he really aggressively said, "How do you know that?" And I just said, "You'll see, you'll see." 3 days later, he came up to me in tears at the end and said, "Thank you." So we start slow. Even here's a very simple thing I present at the beginning. Doing and being will have those two polarities within us. Every culture from yin and yang onwards has articulated that. Let's look at what those mean. And then we have a list of what are the qualities of being, what are the aspects of doing, behavioral. And once I finish that, and everyone understands this, it's not complicated. And then I say, so just talk to your neighbor. How many of you would say you're dominated by doing? And when do you find the moments of being? How do you find them? Okay, the case is already made. And high performance, I do a triangle. So we have doing, being, and high performance is at the top. And high performance is the integration of being and doing, yin and yang, feeling and thinking. So we're already in the conversation. And very few people will say, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? I mean, no, I make it really simple. And I also want to say, Timothy and Raj, and I'd be interested to know if you agree, people are more and more open to this. I think the more things are breaking down, the more radical the uncertainty is, the more people are hungry even, and almost desperate for someone who's going to speak some sense to this, not just do more of what you're doing, put in longer hours and keep thinking more. And the great irony is, and it's implicit in what you both said, what do we prize most? Critical thinking. And yet we do so many things that undermine our critical thinking. Let's get real about this. And let's accept that we've got a lot of emotions inside we're scared of. And that's okay. But let's be real about that. Let's stop arguing, putting all kinds of arguments in the way, when the actual truth is we're very anxious and we don't know how to deal with that. We don't know how to include that.
When you say that, it reminds me of something that Raj's partner, Neha, talks about.
I remember Neha.
You're working, 48-hour shift. You're exhausted. You're walking into a patient room. You're living on coffee and adrenaline. And somebody wants you to make a diagnosis and connect to the patient. And of course, you're all above your neck. There's nothing embodied. It's all just thinking, and you think you're making good decisions when biologically your body's exhausted, you're not really present. And we've set up a system where sometimes that's the way, and we know that you can't be making your best decisions. We know you're not at your highest performance at that point. And yet the system prevails.
It does.
And I'm really curious because I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction. I mean, we look around at our political leaders, and you're in Italy, and I don't need to mention that you've got a certain political leader in Italy, and we've got a certain political leader over here in the US, and there's this other political leaders in China and Russia who would probably not be champions of a lot of what we're talking about here, Nicholas.
They
And,
wouldn't.
on the one hand, we've never been more ready. On the other hand, it feels sometimes like we've never been further away.
I think it's an extraordinary time to be alive. And I think we're each called to do the work we can do. And I love a famous quote by Václav Havel, the former Czech Nobel writer, where he said, I'm paraphrasing, hope is not about the outcome. Hope is about doing what really makes sense for you, regardless of the outcome. I think that's more important than ever for all of us right now. We each need to do what really makes sense. We don't know what the outcome will be. And I think there are more and more people doing that. And the rest is up to something far beyond us, really. We're relying on a good outcome for my well-being. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. I think we really need to hear that now, especially all of us who are so concerned for what is happening and wanting to really contribute, obviously.
Well, there's an element here that I want to relate back to the conscious capitalist movement. One of the things that we're focusing on now is what we call the future of the conscious enterprise. And as we think of the future of the conscious enterprise, we put it in the context of what we call radical uncertainty. That we're, it's not like COVID where, hey, maybe it'll be over at a certain point. The only certainty is uncertainty for the next 5 years. And whether it's geopolitically, our tariffs, supply chains, US dollar, how are those things changing? In an economic environment, it's relatively unpredictable. But also we face enormous disruption to business models from AI, quantum computing, nanotechnology, blockchain, robotics, biotechnology, and the intertwining of those different things will lead to radical shifts in business models. And none of us know, really none of us know how either of those is going to play out. So we like to describe it as radical uncertainty. And it requires a different approach to businesses and how they operate, and certainly a different approach to leadership. What I struggle with a little bit is the sense of urgency of, oh my gosh, we need to pivot. Organizations need to go in this different, or their ability to deal with this radical uncertainty is going to create even more fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And yet we can only move as fast as the leaders and their ability to embody some of the things that you're talking about, and build that trust and build that sense of psychological safety that allows people to thrive in uncertainty. Because human beings don't do well in continued uncertainty. We know that leads to anxiety and stress. And so I'd love you to sort of tie those pieces together. We're sort of in a time of radical uncertainty, high degrees of potential anxiety and stress, having to pivot quickly. And we need leaders to step in faster.
So here's a couple of things that come to me from what you're saying, Timothy. We need to go very fast, but there's a very old teaching which I teach and live, which is that in order to go really fast, we need to go really slow. And uncertainty, I love your phrase, radical uncertainty, is only difficult to the degree that we're trying to be in control. This is a pivot point in our inner development. And it's a pivot point where doing and being enter a much higher integration. Because the more deeply rooted I am, first of all, in my body, and we need to talk about what that means. And secondly, the being is the foundational bowl out of which all my doing arises. And radical uncertainty is much less of a anxiety. It's more like, wow, let me listen. Let me really, let's sit in a room together and go quiet, go deep inside, open all my intelligences, and let's really listen to what might be a next step, because it might not be anything I'll normally think about. You know, we've had for years the phrase in English, the idea came to me. So I think we need to take that more seriously than ever. I speak from my experience. I mean, I live in a beautiful environment here. I'm very lucky. And a friend of mine said to me recently, so what do you do during the day when you're not busy? I say, I do a lot of nothing. I heard myself say, I do a lot of nothing. I sit, I look at our 70 olive trees, and ideas start to come. Really like insights, which are wow. And then uncertain. Of course, things are uncertain. By the way, they always were fundamentally. It's just that it's more obvious now. If we're rooted in a different level of ourselves, radical uncertainty is not a problem. It's all about from where am I navigating? If I'm navigating through my thinking and I'm in a state of anxiety, radical uncertainty is very problematic. Which is why I keep saying to leaders, your inner development needs to be your number one priority right now. Otherwise, you're not fit for leading in these times.
So let's pick up on that. So I'm interested in your inner development. As I mentioned in your intro, you started your career in theater. So please tell us a little more about that. What aspect of the theater, and how did you combine that with peak performance? And then how did you go from there? What was the journey towards the boardroom, and what awakened you, or what shifted you into your life's purpose? So talk about your journey.
I can say quite simply, my years in the theater were always devoted to researching what was the highest state an actor could go into. You know, in sports, they call it the zone, being in the zone. In the arts, people have different words for it, flow, inspiration. But I was so interested in, because also when I trained as an actor, I trained in a very particular methodology, which opened huge vistas for me. And so I brought that to London and everything. And it was always about, I had my own company. What did the actor need to do in order to get into this radically open state where every cell of their body was open? So they would start to speak a line of Shakespeare or what, didn't matter what, and they would just feel so much. Not because they planned to. Like the most boring thing an actor could say to me was, I don't know what to do with this text. Now that's a stupid statement, because the only interesting thing is, what will it do with you? So this is every artist knows this. We don't do creativity. It does us. And when we really open, and we would have in the rehearsal room, miracles would occur. When a group of actors, particularly my company, had understood how to open these gateways, it would be like the roof was going to lift off. And it was always based in the body. This has been my work for 45 years, that the body has to open, and particularly the spine and the pelvis. I mean, we could do a whole conversation about that. And so how did I move into the boardroom? Actually, it happened very naturally. I was part of the company that opened Shakespeare's Globe Theatre in London, which is a phenomenal theatre space. Henry V was directed by my then best friend, Richard Olivier, son of Laurence Olivier. And I was part of the company. Actually, I was producing music because I'm a drummer as well. And then after about 12 years of that, it just became time for me to leave and focus more on what I call presence, like what is really deep, authentic presence. And that started me on, the next chapter of my work. And then about 5 years ago, talking about an idea coming to me, I started hearing this term leader as healer. And I was like, okay, because I was also doing a lot of trauma training. And I mentioned it to a few CEO clients, wondering what they would say. And they were like, yeah, this is important. So I sat with it and got a lot of encouragement from a few key people, and one of whom, Michael Watkins, whom you probably know, said, Nicholas, write a book about this. And then the rest is history, really. So, but I think the most important thing to say is that in my work, I embrace two pillars. I embrace what I call the pillar of awakening and the pillar of healing. And it's the pillar of healing that is the most neglected. It's the most neglected. Even in coaching, one of my highest offerings actually is training coaches. And I train C-suite coaches, and they just have never done the kind of work I teach them to do because they're working from a cognitive perspective. And I'm saying from the beginning, do you understand? You can totally feel your client, but you will never feel them by thinking. Thinking doesn't feel. So unless you're sitting there in a state of open, embodied presence, you will not really be connecting with your client, and so on and so on.
Nicholas, so you mentioned awakening and healing. And so happens my last 3 books are about that, right?
I love your new book, Rob. I love your new book. I hope you got my
Awaken.
I hope you got my testimonial, yeah?
Yes, of course. Yes. Thank you so much for that. But Healing Organization and then Awaken was the after that. And then the next one coming, as you know, is Healing Leaders. So for me, let me tell you how I think about healing and how it came to me. That we live in a world that has a lot of suffering, unacknowledged in many cases, right? We say, yeah, we made all this progress and per capita incomes are up and life expectancy is up and violence is down and all of that is true.
Right.
Right? At the same time, there is tremendous suffering still. Economic suffering, but also psychological suffering, emotional, ecological, etc. And in a world with so much suffering, I think each of us is called on to be a leader, to be a healer. Whether you're a leader or not, but I think we can think of ourselves. And I define that very simply as, can I reduce suffering through my presence and actions? And can I elevate joy? So alleviate suffering, elevate joy, and enable healthy growth, because there's a lot of unhealthy kind of growth in the world, right? And so that was the idea of the Healing Organization. Companies that are doing that, they're not burning out their people, they're not giving them heart attacks, they're not giving them making their customers obese and unhealthy and so forth. They're actually having a net positive impact in multiple dimensions on their employees, customers, communities, and so forth. And then Healing Leaders is the recognition that you cannot heal if you don't heal yourself, right? So, and that was actually something that 3 women essentially told me the same thing when I was writing the Healing Organization. But what about your own healing? Have you worked on your own healing? Right? If you're writing this book about healing organizations. And I said, well, I don't have time for that. I've got a book of life, right? And fortunately, I listened to them and I delayed that book by 5 months and experienced a variety of healing modalities and got started on my own healing journey. And that's what ultimately led to this book, Healing Leaders, which is 7 steps to recovery of self, right? So knowing yourself, loving yourself, being yourself, etc., culminating in healing yourself, healing your wounds and traumas, which we all carry. So that's my, I would say, somewhat simple way of looking at healing. You heal yourself, heal the leader, and then you can become a leader who heals.
Exactly.
Through your work in the world. Now, I want to connect that to your work on healing leaders, right? And see the similarities and points of departure. Like, how do you think about this in a way that's different than what I've just described?
I think there's most probably a lot of similarities, Raj. I would emphasize that it's a lifelong journey, speaking for myself, meaning I still encounter parts. It's a bit like there are endless layers. I think we each have core topics and they have endless layers. And it's not like we're working on them all the time, but every once in a while it becomes clear, okay, I'm touching another level of my unhealed interior. So I'm personally in that forever. And I think leaders need to understand this. It's not a weekend workshop. I think we're all, the trauma word I'm not a big fan of the trauma word really, but I think we're all, by the very nature of our culture and how we're educated and how we grow up, we're all carrying a lot of, I would call it, contraction inside, which is limiting the full flow of my intelligence. I mean, if we make it really simple, I'm 5 years old, I feel frightened, and all I really need is that my caregiver, whoever they are, says, it's okay to feel that. Come here, let me hold you, just feel it, and then it passes through. But the great majority of the time, we don't have that. And therefore, the only thing we can do is reduce that feeling. And the only way I can reduce the feeling is by limiting my breathing and lifting out of my base, which is my pelvis. I see it very simply because I see it energetically in people. And that we do over and over and over again. So by the time we're adults, whole parts of our system are shut off. And then we say, oh, it'd be better if I had no fear. That's nonsense. Fear is not a problem. The only problem is you don't allow yourself to feel your fear. Because once someone is safe enough to feel whatever they're feeling, it's always an opening process. And they always feel like their body comes more online afterwards. It's really amazing. Someone finally allows themselves to feel their anxiety without going into a narrative about it. And they start to feel very expansive, very open. And then they say things like, wow, I feel my legs. This is the endless process. And I think that's why, exactly as you said, Raj, if I write another book, I have the title, which is To Be a Blessing, the Highest Calling of Leadership.
Mm-hmm.
The limit of my healing impact in the world, the limit of my blessing impact in the world are the unhealed parts of me. It's very simple. That's why my inner work, if I'm a change agent, a leader, a consultant, a coach, my first priority has to always be my inner work, because that's what I'm transmitting to the world.
So I love that. And here's the opportunity and the challenge that I see in part, and I want to approach it in at one level, where does our leadership development occur? It occurs for the most part in business and in large businesses who have leadership development programs. And, you graduate up the staircase of leadership development, go from one level of leadership development to another. And so that's interesting to me, is that, when you stop and ask, what kind of leaders do we want here? And we sort of say, oh, we want healing leaders. And then you ask, well, what does that mean in the context of today's business world and today's business development paradigms of what that arc of development looks like when somebody may or may not be in that company forever? And I want to contrast that with the other pillar, which is it's a lifelong journey, stupid. Like this is about your human development. And yet that dialogue about our individual human development, where does that happen? Because it used to I don't know where it used to happen. I don't know if it used to happen in the tribe and the elders said, we're gonna take you, Timothy, as a young man and, make you into from a boy to a man and wise man. And I see this fundamental disconnect
Absolutely.
between, leadership development happens in organizations. It's got a certain thing, but the core element of lifelong development and the context in which that is encouraged, seeded, brought along. I don't know where that happens other than by happenstance. Raj and I run into another, Raj has some experiences, I have some experiences, you have some experiences. Say a little bit about that in terms of the development of human leaders who are healers.
Listen, I see a lot of so-called leadership development. I think it's woefully inadequate. I don't think it's preparing leaders in any way to be the kind of leaders that are needed now. It's woefully inadequate. I think what we're talking about should be the core of an MBA program. One of the things I do at the IMD is I do 3 days within a 4-week program. Now, they respect me enough now that when they present my work, and it's typically 40 global leaders, they say this is the highlight of the whole program because we're going to do a deep dive inside. I think we need to rewrite the whole idea of leadership development. I was in a company contacted me a while back to do work with their high potentials to take them to the next level of leadership. And in the call with their head of HR, she said, we can't have a program where people cry.
Oh,
so I wrote her a very strong message afterwards. Along the lines of, then you're just talking rubbish if you want to take leaders to the next level of development. It's rubbish. It's just corporate speak. Get real. I said it a little bit more politely than that, but we need to rewrite. Another example, I was working with a top team from a huge bank in the Far East. And it was very interesting because they'd done endless culture change initiatives that weren't working. And they were like, why is it not working? So we'd done some very strong work. And I had lunch with one of their head people. And he had like a light bulb during our conversation. I would say almost a life-changing moment because he suddenly got that every single change initiative had addressed the doing, analytical, strategic level of everybody. And they had totally missed the being heart level. He was like shocked, inspired, frightened by the implication for his life as well. And as the program developed, the whole room started to get this. It was amazing. It was one of the strongest kind of light bulb moments I've seen in the team. And then they got scared by the realization that the only way this was going to change would be if we did a series of retreats where they looked at their inner development, because we did some ancestral trauma work, for instance, which was also a light bulb for them, just to realize what they were carrying. And we're still in dialogue about whether that's going to happen or not, because we really got to the core of the issue, and then the core of whether they're ready to do that or not. And this is the core issue, Timothy and Raj. Are we going to rewrite the whole idea of leadership development?
Yeah.
We have to.
Yeah.
We have to. Because we're not developing leaders in the way that's needed now. We're not developing consciousness.
No.
I see this at the IMD. It's high-level strategic input. Amazing input. But it's not preparing their deeper intelligence at all. We're at a critical time now in the evolution of humanity.
Well, Nicholas, as we come to the end of our conversation, a couple of things you talk about the practical embodiment of all of this, and that presence should be a 24/7 practice. So do you recommend Any practices other than what we talked about earlier, becoming aware of your breath, etc., how people can, through the course of their chaotic days, come back to presence, right? Is there any practice that you would recommend?
Well, first of all, I think everyone, all of us, we all need to have some regular physical practice. And I think I meet a lot of leaders who will go to the gym at 5 a.m. because they've understood that the rest of their day will be better if they do that. So whether it's gym or yoga or Tai Chi or running or whatever it is, and not once a week, we need regular, we need to keep the body, we need to keep the energy moving. And by the way, most of those people say they get the best ideas when it's so obvious. Secondly, I think we all need to be doing the inner, let's call it the inner healing work. And for that, we need guidance. We need mentors. We need coaches. I think every leader needs a coach who can do that kind of work with them. In terms of the day-to-day, I think we have to find as many ways as possible of keeping that sense of I'm here. And even if I'm got a crazy amount of input coming, my mind is racing, how can I keep intentionally finding that sense of, just a minute, let me notice my body. Let me breathe for a moment. How can I do that? It has to be an intentional practice. And once we get into the more emotional work, we know that if I can't do that, I probably need to acknowledge what I'm feeling emotionally. Just acknowledge it, feel it. And that already will open the door to a deeper sense of presence. I think the key word is commitment. This has to become my first commitment. Also at home. How do I listen to my partner, my children? I have amazing stories on programs of people coming in and saying, I just had the best conversation ever with my daughter. Or, yeah, of course, presence is not just for the workplace.
I'd like to end with some rapid fire questions. That's okay with you?
Okay.
These are a little more lighthearted. What is a book that has changed your life?
I will be my first great theatre mentor, a famous Polish director, was called Towards a Poor Theatre.
What's a word that would describe how people feel in your presence? That you would hope that people would feel this way in your presence?
Connected, alive, and present.
That your presence, in a way, triggers their own state of presence?
At best, yes.
What's the favorite place that you've ever taught a retreat or participated in a retreat?
Well, at the IMD, we used to work on campus, but again, out of respect for my work, we go up to the mountains. So we work in a beautiful place in the Alps.
And if you could have a dinner with a spiritual teacher or a leadership icon from any era, who would that be?
I'd have dinner with Trump and Putin. I mean it. Get me in a room with them. Seriously.
We'll see.
I'm very persuasive. I don't know if I could persuade them, but I'd love to try.
Or you could come out like them. I mean, that's some other.
No, I doubt it.
What is one small daily practice that keeps you grounded?
Conscious breathing.
And I think you already answered these questions. If corporate meetings could start with one ritual or question, what would you suggest? You mentioned a couple of minutes of silence.
A couple of minutes silence, bringing attention to the breath, to my grounding, and making an inner commitment to listen to each other as much as I'm going to speak.
Well, thank you, Nicholas. It's been a real delight. As I mentioned, I got to spend a few days with you and Bob Anderson in that incredible program. And there were so many things about that were so different and unique, including tapping into our own intuition, right? And trying to actually predict things or see things that you can't normally see. So there's a tremendous richness to this work. And so we strongly recommend to our listeners, please get Nicholas's amazing book, Leader as Healer, and follow this and start to think of your leadership in a much deeper and richer way. So thank you very much for being with us.
It's been an absolute delight to dialogue with you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. And thank you to our listeners. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please on whatever channel you're listening. Please hit the subscribe button. And if you feel so moved, go over to Apple and iTunes and leave us a review. And any and all comments are always welcome by Raj and I. And I want to mention that we're hosting the Conscious Enterprise conference in Cincinnati in September 23rd, 24th. You can go to the consciouscapitalism.org website to see more about that. And a big thank you to Rainbow Productions, our producer for today, and to Conscious Capitalism, Inc., who supports and sponsors our program. And we'll see you all next week. Thank you.